Welcome to the fourth instalment of my Mystery of Bear Cave adventure. But before we get into the next scene, I'd just very briefly like to go over a bit of housekeeping, as there were some issues which arose from the previous episode of my video journal that I'd like to tackle. First of all, as was plainly obvious, my last video session was far too long. I'm sorry about that. My coverage of the scene, the storytelling and the gameplay was far too laboured, and a lot of this, I think, was to do with the new scene notes that I'd introduced in that session. That's these. While I think they're a good idea to prepare for the session with some ideas for scene setting locations, NPCs and a few alternative plotline possibilities, I had simply written too much and got bogged down with my over-elaborate storytelling. I think there was about 3 or even maybe 4 pages of notes that I'd made here, and that was far too much. So, while I'm keeping the scene notes as part of my play, I enjoyed using them, they were fun and very useful. I'll be trimming them down to something more efficient for a quicker session by restricting my thoughts to just 1 page. So, there we go. This will include ideas for the scene's location, cast of characters, with brief ideas regarding their motivations and attitudes, questions that my character has to move the investigation forward, and some sort of plan B ideas should my line of questioning fail. All this boiled down into sort of simpler bullet point-like notations to help guide me through my investigation, my ideas for the story development within the scene, and how the scene might be successfully concluded, or what might constitute a failure, and how I might turn that around in the next scene. So, where did we leave Dan in the last episode? Well, he's made some real progress in finding out what's been going on in the town of Bear Cave while he was away at university. He'd had confirmation about his mother's gossip regarding this so-called bad element that had invaded the town, as well as some actual eyewitness accounts of one of the crazed attacks that seems to be plaguing Bear Cave. Additionally, Dan's girlfriend admitted that there was a drug problem that was rife amongst the high school students, and even his sister may have been involved by way of her relationship with one of the gang members. But Moira, that was Dan's former girlfriend, was reluctant to say who this guy was, perhaps because of her fear of the consequences of doing so. Most of all, it's now clear that the town was gripped in a conspiracy of silence and intimidation, though who the townsfolk are actually scared of, this new gang that's come into town or the town's sheriff, is yet unclear. And now, on with scene 4 of the Mystery of Bear Cave. And so, we're on to scene 4 of my little town adventure, The Mystery of Bear Cave. And before we actually get into working with this particular scene, there's some prerequisites that we have to fill in on the scene sheet before we even start. Things like the location, events, time of day, this sort of thing. So if we take a look at the game manual here, you'll see that it gives you a set of instructions to work through the scene, and the first one here is roll or choose a location. Now that obviously that's giving you a choice, and which one you choose is very much dependent on how your investigation has gone perhaps in the previous scene. It may be obvious to you from where you left off in your previous scene where you need to go next, so that'll determine your location. But in the case where you've perhaps met a dead end, for example, and you need to kick off some new ideas about where the next scene is going to go, then you might randomly roll up a location. And there's tables in the manual that gives you a set of random locations that just might trigger new ideas for how you can move the investigation forward. In my particular case, I've got a pretty good idea where I want to move on to next. And that's because Darren is kind of hitting a stone wall here. He's getting very little information out of his family and friends. They kind of drip feed in him small amounts or small clues or tidbits of information, but it's not enough. It's not that smoking gun that will lead him to what is actually at the core of the events in the town. He really needs some key to unlock a firm avenue of investigation, and so far it's all been just beyond his grasp. He has little bits of information, scraps of information, but they're just not all coming together to coalesce into this one big clue that is going to lead him to the source of the town's problems. Okay, so how would he do that? He's tried his family and he's tried his friends. He knows he can't go to the police because obviously there's something wrong with the town sheriff. And when I say something wrong, that's from Darren's point of view. He just does not trust Sheriff Moore. From the little run-in that he had with him, he doesn't feel that he can rely on anything this sheriff has to say. In fact, he's been kind of warned off from doing what he's doing, which is nosing in to what is going on in the town. That's the sheriff's area, and he doesn't want Darren poking his nose into his business as he sees it. So if he can't go to this part of his circle of acquaintances, where can he go to? Who can he go to that he knows from his past that he can trust? Now, the way I did Darren's background, as you know, he's the athletic type, the kind of cliched jock type. You know, he was a school athlete. I think I even intimated that he was a member of the school football team in the past. So the type of character that I kind of imagined that he would trust, almost like a family member, someone that he has a real close relationship with, would be the team's coach. Now, I did think about a teacher at one point. That would be another obvious type of person that would be helpful in this particular situation. But going on Darren's background that I wrote, that he is the athletic type, kind of like football, the football star, you know, star player type, and he's gone off to university now, and but he still has these fond memories of someone that's obviously supported him and given advice in the past. Just the sort of person that he can rely on now to perhaps answer some of his questions. And so this is what I was thinking before I kind of kicked off the scene with my scene notes. I thought of the team coach. That's exactly the kind of strong character that I feel could give Darren some of the reliable information that he needs. Not the sort of person that's scared in the way that his family members or friends are about the malevolent influence that's going on in the town, that's perhaps intimidating them and stopping them from being truthful with Dan about the events and what they think is going on. Someone that's going to maybe stand up to these people, and that is the kind of coach figure I see. So anyway, so we've got to decide on a location, and of course that would obviously be the high school, Bear Cave High School. Excuse my writing. Now, the next thing we've got to do in our little list here is establish the elements that will capture the investigator's attention. Now, to me, that is more obviously relevant when you roll up a random location, because I've already got a pretty firm idea about where Darren's going next and who he's seeing and I can already imagine in my mind's eye what this location looks like. I don't really feel that I have to put too much work into writing down or making up the kind of scene elements here. Things like the weather, for example, have very little relevance in this particular case, where I know I'm just going to specifically go to one location, a specific location, and question a specific person. But of course, if you randomly roll up a scene and don't quite know how this is going to pan out, these scene elements will probably become more crucial in the kind of clues that you're going to be able to pick up from this place, particularly if you're just working on your toes and kind of making this up as you go along. Obviously, I'm working in that grey area between making things up and having a little bit of an idea of plan and direction of where things are going. So I don't think I need that much information here, except the time of day, which, leading on from the afternoon meeting that Darren and his friends had in the diner in the last scene, we're going to see this is late afternoon. So he's going to the school at the end of the school day. So, as I say, there's several different types of people that Darren could expect to rely on when it comes to giving him advice or help in this particular situation. A former teacher, perhaps the school's head teacher, but I've settled on this coach figure. So the next thing we have to do, of course, is roll up the name of the coach. And of course, like everything else in Little Town, there we have a table for that. Here we go, names, and I've tagged that, so we can move straight into this. Family name, first of all. Now, this is a D66, 2 dice, so 20, 22, 22, Edwards. And let's give Coach Edwards a first name, shall we? Male names, D66 again, so we've got a 40, 40 something. Come on, let's try again. 42, Douglas. Doug Edwards. That's fine. Right, so we've got our NPC for this particular scene. Obviously, you can have as many NPCs you want, depending on how complex you want the scene. But I kind of know exactly what I want to do here. And this NPC would be Coach Doug Edwards. Now, the next thing you want to probably think about is give this NPC a little bit of a backstory, just a few items of information about his attitudes and attributes, just so you can picture someone that you're talking to, or who in this case Darren's talking to. Now, you can imagine in your own mind eye the kind of stereotypical football coach, high school football coach, strong, large, male type. It doesn't have to be like that, but that's where I'm going from, because I'm picturing the kind of coaches that I've seen in TV shows and movies in the past. We also know that he's probably very friendly towards Darren, so he has a good attitude towards Darren, so he's more likely to be as helpful as he possibly can be, depending on how intimidated this person feels. And that will dictate how much information he's willing to share. Now, I guess you could actually, and one of the things that I thought about was almost creating a table of willingness, I kind of called it, where you're approaching a character, and even though they might generally be friendly, they still could be a little bit suspicious of you, or frightened, intimidated. So just because they're friendly doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be completely willing to share information with you. So I created this idea and I'm still working on it. As I say, I'm calling it my table of willingness. And then what I would do is roll up on this table and it goes from no, they're hostile. And by hostile, what I really mean is they could be a friendly person, like Coach Edwards, someone that Dan has been friendly with in the past. But in this particular case, they would be still quite reticent to share information completely with them because they might feel intimidated or scared. So rolling on this table will decide on how willing they are to give Dan the information that he wants. So I imagined it would go like this. I haven't worked this out fully myself yet. As you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Really, I could do almost like 6 attributes to make it roll with a D6. But basically, the idea is the higher you roll, the more enthusiastic and willing the person is to give you the kind of information you want, to the point where at the top end you've got enthusiastic, and they will not only answer their question, but they'll be more forthcoming with information that Dan didn't even ask about. Okay, so let's see how willing this Coach Edwards would be to give information to 4. So we're at the top end here. Useful, I'd say. You know, if it was neutral, what I would say was that Dan would be in that situation where he could either intimidate the person if the person was not friendly, but we know Coach Edwards is more likely to be friendly. So Dan could use that sweet talk that we used on Moira. I guess we could try that if you want, just to see the mechanism working. So let's say we've rolled on my table of willingness, and Coach Edwards has come out neutral. Maybe he's not scared on his own behalf. He's obviously a strong character, I feel, but he may be scared to get Dan involved with what's going on. So in that case, he's still being a bit standoffish about it. So let's take that Coach Edwards is being neutral in the way he's approaching Darren's questions. So we're going to try and conflict. Come on, add it here. Sweet talk. Have I mixed it up in the cards here? Yes, I have. Okay, now this is one of the common move cards. Sweet talk. When trying to manipulate someone, roll 2 d6s is presence, which, as we already know, Dan is the guy with no personality whatsoever. He's no charisma, so that's a 0. Plus the NPC's attitude. Well, that's a good plus. So we'll roll our 2 d6s first of all, and let's try and get a good one. 4. Good Lord. Plus the NPC's attitude. They refuse to do what you ask and develop an unfriendly attitude towards you. Now, that just shows you what would happen if we'd decided that Coach Edwards was neutral, slightly reticent to get Dan involved in this. Still very friendly towards him. Obviously, they've got a good relationship from the past, but he just does not want Dan to get involved in whatever's going on in the town. And so in that case, if Coach Edwards was from either hostile or neutral in his willingness, we would have now failed that particular role, and the coach would well, it says develop an unfriendly attitude towards you, but in this particular case, I think he would just, like everyone else in this investigation so far, just completely shut down towards Dan. But as I said, already decided that and rolled that he would be at the top end of this willingness. I can't remember what I rolled initially there, but I was looking more towards the useful to out and out enthusiastic level here. I wouldn't say he was completely enthusiastic yet, but I would say he was being useful. So, okay, we've decided all that. So what we need to do now is get into really asking the coach some questions. Now, let's go back to our notes here. Yeah. Moving to the privacy of the coach's office, Darren moved the conversation onto more recent events and finally broached the subject of the attack on the coach. Now, you may remember that Darren's friend Dennis was an eyewitness to one of these crazed attacks, and this attack happened to be on the high school coach. There's method in my madness here. It all kind of links together, really. He is actually now finally talking to someone who is a confirmed eyewitness to one of the events that is going on in the town. Much to his relief, Coach Edwards seems quite willing to discuss. That's good, because that works into my willingness. So if I hadn't rolled willingness here, this particular idea that I've got here would now be redundant and I'd have to move on to a different particular idea. But this all works out that the coach is actually useful and willing to discuss this issue. Much to the relief, Coach Edwards seems quite willing to discuss the incident, though he was obviously upset about the way that one of his students had turned on him so viciously. Now, this is, of course, the crazed attacks that are happening where people who were perhaps friendly towards other acquaintances to acquaintances suddenly turned on them completely out of the blue. So quite naturally, Coach Edwards was really confused about what's going on here. So I can move on. He was obviously still totally confused about the motives behind the attack, the bizarre reasoning of his students' accusations, and concern over the kid's subsequent hospitalisation. The crazed attack in this particular case involved these accusations by the student, who was absolutely adamant that Coach Edwards had dropped him at the very last minute from his place in the high school team, right at the point of an important championship game. But of course, the whole mystery behind this weird event was this had not happened yet. In fact, it was months away. So this irrational student was referencing things that hadn't happened yet. Okay. Deciding to take a chance, Darren has told the coach that he'd heard about the rumours of students experimenting with drugs, and asked whether the coach thought this might explain the incident. So he's really wanting to know now, and obviously he respects the coach's opinion on this. To answer a yes or no question, roll 2d6 and refer to the table below. Okay, come on. Flipping heck. 2. The sum is below luck and the numbers rolled are equal. Aha, actually, again, I forgot this the last time I did this, that I'm thinking you have to roll high. You don't, you need to roll low because it needs to be below Darren's luck, which is a 9. So yes, and that is fantastic. Finally, something very positive. So I'll just note down this first answer here. Yes, and the reason this is good is because the and applies that not only does the coach answer this question very positively, but he goes on to add more information than Darren had asked. And this all lends itself well to this idea that the coach is at least useful in the way that he's going to be answering Darren's questions. So there's all kind of working here for a change. So that's great. So how would that work? Yes. So yes, the coach thinks definitely the drugs and the violent incidents are related. Not only that, but, and that's the and here, and in this case, I think to really move the case forward, we should be thinking that the coach might tell Darren something useful about who is supplying these drugs. So I think Coach Edwards would go on to say, yes, and it's this damned new people that have moved into town that are supplying the drugs. Okay, that sounds okay. Yeah, that'd work fine. Okay, moving on then. There was a long pause as the coach mulled over his response before he confided to Darren that there was a consensus of opinion among the students and even the staff members on this point. So, everyone seems to know where these drugs are actually coming from. There was no point hiding it, as it seems to be common knowledge. But the school staff seemed helpless to combat the growing problem. Now, that's maybe because they just haven't managed to catch them in the act yet, but they probably know who is responsible for distributing these drugs amongst the students. So then Dan goes on, as he's on a bit of a roll here with these questions. Was the drug problem related to the new group that moved into town? Actually, we've already kind of answered that question. That would be the yes and. So that's already answered. We know that yes, it is the new group that's moved into town that is the cause of the drug problem. Going well. So finally we come to the nub. As things are going well, we can actually answer a crucial question now. Dan had heard talk that Grace, his sister, was involved with one of the gang members. Did Coach Edwards know who that might be? So yes or no here, and this is a this is a crucial one. Come on. 7. The sum is below luck. The numbers rolled a different, one odd and one evening. Yes, Coach Edwards does know. Right, that's a yes, so it's not completely helpful. It kind of answers the first half of the question. Dan has heard that Grace was involved with one of the gang members, and I think that's what the yes relates to. Yes, Coach Edwards says he thinks she was as well. Do you know who that might be? Well, if I'd rolled better, I might get a yes but or a yes and in that case, I would have come up with the name, and Coach Edwards would say that. So how do I conclude what was a very positive interrogation here? When it wasn't interrogation, it was questioning. We all seem to be getting Dan seemed to be getting the answers that he really needed here, apart from this last one, which has let him down. So how can we turn that into a positive thing? Well, I think in this particular case, what we would say was that Coach Edwards knows that Grace was involved, had a relationship with one of these gang members. That's definite now. That's confirmation about things that Darren had already heard. So that's one thing that's actually positively settled now. But Coach Edwards doesn't know who this person would be. But I think the way that Coach Edwards would be helpful, though, because he's obviously trying to be as helpful as he can to Darren, he would possibly say something like, he doesn't know who this particular kid is, but he knows someone who does for sure know who this is. Maybe he knows, he doesn't know the kid that Grace has been seeing, but he does recognise one of the other gang members and does know his name. Yeah, that's a good one. That would be a good lead forward to move into the next scene. There we go. A little higgledy-piggledy towards the end there, but I'm sure once I start writing down my notes in my journal, I'll clarify this a little bit better. But all that's left to do now before we close this scene is decide whether this scene has been positive or negative. Well, clearly it's been very positive here because we have a clear lead, or Darren has a clear lead about what to do next. He either he sees this person that Coach Edwards has named. He knows where to find them. So he's definitely going to him next for the next leg of the investigation. So we'll say that was definitely positive. So we'll move the time limit down from 7 to 6, and we will end scene. Which just goes all to show that even when I've got notes in front of me, I still get a bit tongue-tied and flustered about how to link all this information together into a flowing narrative that makes sense. But there you go. I guess that's all part of the game. Cheers. Thanks for watching.